As more countries join the UK, Canada and Australia to recognize a Palestinian state this week, Israel is actively working to remove any semblance of one on the ground. It's ramping up settlement building in the occupied West Bank with talk of annexing a large part, if not all of it. So is this just a symbolic face-saving move from nations that have stood by Israel in the past, or have they gone further and poked the bear? I'm Hazem Sika, and this is the Newsmakers. Leaders from around the world are gathering this week for the annual UN General Assembly. The age-old question of Israel, Palestine and the two-state solution is front and center in New York. Israel and its closest ally, the United States, have boycotted the meeting. And the reality on the ground is one of illegal settlements swallowing up more land from Palestinians in the West Bank, and a war on Palestinians in Gaza that will enter its third year next month. And with the fear that Israel will ultimately respond by formally annexing the land it's occupied for 58 years, is the two-state solution even viable anymore? Here's a look.
Palestinian recognition is gaining momentum. The UK, Australia, Canada and Portugal made announcements just a day before a UN General Assembly gathering on the two-state solution on Monday. France and Belgium are to follow suit during the UNGA this week. The UN meeting aims to revive hopes for a peaceful solution to the decades-long conflict. It will build on an earlier plan called the New York Declaration, adopted by the General Assembly earlier this month. The text outlines a roadmap for the two-state solution, which includes an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and release of all hostages. It also calls for an end to Hamas rule in Gaza and the group's disarmament. A reformed Palestinian Authority would be the sole governing body for both Gaza and the West Bank. Security guarantees and normalization between Israel and Arab countries are also part of the plan. But Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu dismissed the recognition as a reward to terrorism, insisting a Palestinian state will never exist. And on the ground, he's taking action to kill the idea. Israel has launched an ongoing ground operation to occupy Gaza City. The attacks have flattened homes and infrastructure and forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to flee. Israel also calls for forced displacement of Palestinians into neighbouring countries, while Netanyahu's right-wing ministers talk about turning Gaza into a real estate bonanza.
Where is the state? In the street or in the tents? What state is this that they recognize? Are we able to find something to eat or a place to stay?
Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, Israel is expanding its illegal settlements. Earlier this month, Netanyahu signed a controversial plan that would cut across the land of a future Palestinian state. 3,400 new settlements under the E1 project will divide the occupied West Bank and isolate it from occupied East Jerusalem.
This is the best evidence of the fact that this is a political project whose objective is not to dismantle Hamas, but to kill the possibility of a two states and to deny the right of Palestinian people to live in peace in the region.
Many see the recognition of Palestine as largely symbolic, but there is hope that this momentum will lead to real concrete action against Israel's ongoing campaign of destruction.
To accomplish a just peace and not just empty words or words that are only for publicity. We want safety and stability to be achieved on the ground for the Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank.
Netanyahu, with the support of the US, vows to respond to this surge in Palestinian recognition. So far, nothing has forced Israel to change its course. But will this new global momentum spark a shift that finally leads to a free Palestine?
So joining me now to debate that and more are from Boston, Public Policy Fellow at the American University of Beirut, Rami Khouri. From London, Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House, Yossi Meckelberg. And from Ontario, Professor Emeritus of Law at Western University in Ontario and former UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, Michael Link. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. So I want to ask you this question to all three of you, broadly speaking. Will this recognition of a Palestinian state by these new countries make any difference? Rami Khouri.
Thank you for having me. I think it will make a little bit of a difference. It is a significant gesture, and it has political implications, has legal implications, that the territories that Israel now controls in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and elsewhere are occupied of the territories of another state that are occupied. So it has some symbolic significance, but it has no real impact on the actual lives of Palestinians or the policies of the Israeli or American governments, which are the only two really ones that count outside the Arab world. So I think it's good. We should encourage it, and we should demand that and work with them to move to the next stage, which is to stop the genocide, reduce the burden of the occupation, and move towards a permanent negotiated resolution that's fair to everybody.
Yossi Mekelberg, what's your view on this? Is this, as Rami Khouri has said, just a gesture, but perhaps a step in the right direction?
Yeah, I also think we should welcome this development. I think sometimes people confuse between symbolism and meaningless. Symbolism in international affairs, symbolism in diplomacy is important, and it's not the only development we see. You know, it adds to that decision by ICJ, for instance, a while ago, declaring that the occupation is illegal and settlement should be removed. It adds to, you know, the acceptance and by the General Assembly voting in vast majority, 145 against 12, in support of the New York Declaration that promotes a two-state solution. Now we add the recognition, more and more countries, and not only, you know, because we know that even before this declaration or the recognition, most of the countries in the world recognize Palestine, but in this case are also close allies of Israel are sending a message of support in Palestinian statehood. So I think there is an accumulating impact here in which the international community sent a very clear message that this is the way forward of a two-state solution, of a Palestinian state must become a reality. Obviously, where I agree with completely also with Rami, without actually ending the war in Gaza, without ensuring that this bloodshed is coming to an end and the hostages are coming back and the end of occupation in the West Bank and all these countries that recognize take actually measures to ensure that this turns into reality, it will remain just a gesture.
Michael Link, from the perspective of someone who has worked for the UN and worked firsthand with Palestinians, what is your view on this? Does this matter?
I think of this at two different levels. As an international lawyer, I'm recognizing that having countries, important countries in the global north, including 3 of the 7 G7 countries, and now 4 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, recognizing the state of Palestine. This means that these countries who wind up doing this have to review their diplomatic and cultural and economic ties with Israel to ensure that their own agreements with Israel do not interfere with their recognition of Palestinian sovereignty over Palestinian territory, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. So that will be a useful tool, I think, in pushing these countries to review their own free trade agreements. Canada, for example, my country, has an extensive Canada-Israel free trade agreement, which recognizes the settlements as part of Israel and allows settlement goods and services to come into Canada tariff-free. But, you know, on the other hand, I'm I'm looking at this as if this is even possible. And at the level of political realism, what we've been hearing from countries from the global north over the last 10 or 15 years is this is really 5 minutes to midnight. And if we don't act now, there's going to be no more Palestinian state. In 2013, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said to Congress when he announced the launching of a peace initiative that we have something between 18 and 24 months in order to be able to get a Palestinian state, or it's all over. At that time, there were 360,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Move forward to 2016, when the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 2334 in the waning days of the Obama administration. And this resolution declared that the Israeli settlements were a flagrant violation of international law. And it said that these settlements are, and I'm quoting, dangerously imperiling the chances of a viable two-state solution. At that time, there are 400,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank alone. Now, fast forward to 2025, and Emmanuel Macron said the other day that we are 1 minute to midnight now with the chances of trying to get a Palestinian state. We're now at 525,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. I don't see any sense of a realistic political strategy coming from leaders of the global north of how to ever unwind that to create the basis for a genuine Palestinian state. So a cynic may say this is all a mirage, all imagery, all performance. And we're not going to get a Palestinian state if there's no concerted activity to put real costs on Israel to wind back its settlement program.
Well, this gets to the next question of the feasibility of all of this. And I want to put this to you, Yossi Meckelberg. The vote that was carried out on September 12th in support of the two-state solution calls for the Palestinian Authority to govern all Palestinian territory. But is that even feasible at this point?
I mean, as long as the war continues, as long as we see the horrific catastrophe that we see in Gaza, what we see in the West Bank, that the occupation is more entrenched than ever. The Israeli government talks about building E1 that will completely divide between Jerusalem and the West Bank. We can't see that it's going to be feasible. We need, completely to change the direction in which this conflict is moving. And for this, you need a committed international community. You need the United States to change its policies. You probably need election in Israel because we are the most extreme government ever in Israel. They want annexation. They want not only annexation of the West Bank. They want to annex Gaza and probably with as little Palestinian as possible. You need election. You need a reform of the PA, and you need new leadership. So there are a lot of stages. What we see now at best, what happens right now in some capitals, what happened in New York right now, it's a first positive move forwards. But to make it feasible, to translate it into something that will lead to a two-state solution, and probably what was said earlier about the settlements, probably it will be very, very difficult to remove enough settlers to go back to the kind of the Oslo idea of a two-state solution. And we need to think about more creatively, probably of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation, which will minimize the movement of people from one side to another, but ensure that there is a fair and just solution for everyone.
Well, we can perhaps come back to that idea in just a moment, but I want to talk more specifically about the settlement, the illegal settlement building that's going on in the occupied West Bank. Rami Khouri, the measures that Israel is taking right now, such as the settlements that are being built in what's being called the E1 area, has that completely killed off the idea of a two-state solution now, when you look at the situation on the ground?
Probably, if it's implemented quickly, but the two-state solution died, 20, 30 years ago, when the settlements kept kept expanding, as Michael outlined. And this is a process that started in 1915. When the early Zionist movement decided to work for a state in Palestine, which was 93% Arab. And the Zionist leaders in their memoirs and their letters and their statements, books, have said clearly that we have to find a way to move the Arabs out, get rid of the Arabs. So this process of taking over all of historic Palestine has been a goal of the Zionist movement from the beginning. It will only be tempered if there's enough pressure on it internationally. And this is something that is still not clear. And the only pressure that really counts right now is from the United States. And the United States, for the moment, is fully with Israel. All of the actions that have been taken since 1967, most of them are probably can be adjusted or reversed, except for the big, gigantic settlements along the Green Line. But the smaller settlements all over the West Bank and elsewhere, there's probably resolutions to those. The only thing that will make the world pressure the Israelis, like the world pressured South Africa, is the fear of political leaders in Western countries that they will be voted out of office because of the anger of their citizens. And one of the most striking things in the world now is the global popular grassroots sentiment for Palestinian rights and for justice for Israelis and Palestinians equally in Palestine. And if there can be a convergence between that massive activism that's increasingly showing itself in calls for sports boycotts, music boycotts, things of that nature, if those two forces can come together, the top-level political statements and the activism, then the chances of some kind of change can happen. And we've seen world situations in the past where suddenly a big power makes an abrupt change. The South African, F.W. de Klerk's move, Nixon going to China, Gorbachev stepping down, the Northern Ireland peace agreements. These are dramatic actions that totally reversed previous entrenched situations. So yes, I think nothing that Israel has done cannot be reversed. Nothing. But the compromise is going to come by allowing some of the settlements to stay where they are in exchange for land of equal value and some kind of giving the Palestinians the rights that they deserve and that they have inherently. This is a long-term process. It takes time for these things to happen, but the trends are all moving in the right direction, I think.
Michael Link, what about this idea of a one-state solution in some form there? I mean, Yossi talked about some sort of confederation. This idea of Palestinian rights in conjunction with Israeli rights all being recognized together in one state, with Palestinians getting full citizenship rights and self-governing rights. Is that something that could work?
I think that's where we have to look for our forward direction with regards to this. If the two-state solution, because of Israel's relentless settlement expansion and a de facto annexation of West Bank land on top of what they've done in East Jerusalem, has foreclosed the possibility of a two-state solution, maybe the best thing we should be doing is giving the last rites and a decent burial to a two-state solution, and instead turn to either a confederation idea, where, as a constitutional scholar, one can say that there are different possibilities of how Palestinians and Israelis would chart their future together, or a simple single-state democratic state where the 7.5 million Israeli Jews between the river and the sea are living within equal rights under a similar and same constitution as the 7.5 million Palestinians who live between the river and the sea. Certainly among Western leaders, they have been, I think, far too timid and far too late with respect to trying to think through what a viable future would be between Israelis and Palestinians. And the only future, I think, that could ever have a possibility of succeeding is where there are equal rights between Palestinians and Israelis. It could be in a confederation that may even involve Jordan, or it could be the single state possibility. But and I think you're going to have a much better possibility of rallying people around the banner of justice and equal rights than you ever are trying to rally them around the idea of partition, and particularly among Israeli Jews thinking, we've solved the problem, we've put Palestinians behind a wall, they can have their many Bantustan, and all will be well in the decades to come. I think that kind of future is barren of the kind of political possibilities that we need to be thinking about.
Yossi Meckelberg, let's broaden this out a bit. Talk about the outside pressure that is building on Israel at this point. Regardless of whether you agree with this or not, do you think we're moving closer to countries imposing sanctions on Israel in the way that sanctions were imposed on apartheid South Africa, for example, which is what Rami referred to earlier?
Let me just refer, with your permission, to two things.
Sure.
With all due respect to Rami, I don't think the Zionist movement is monolithic. Between Martin Buber and Jabotinsky and the rest, and what you see interpretation now, it's not a monolithic movement. Some even supported back in the 30s a one-state solution long before it became popular in certain intellectual circle. And the confederation model that I support is actually a two-state solution in a one-state reality, which both sides actually can fulfill their rights for self-determination. But as I said, everyone will have equal rights within this territory. And as for the pressure, I think it's mounting already. We see, for instance, Spain suspended military aid or military trade with Israel. We see other countries imposing sanctions. As long as Israel behaves the way it behaves right now in Gaza, in the West Bank, and ministers within the cabinet, senior ministers, whether it's finance minister or minister of national security, keep talking about annexation, about starving other people. I think they make it for them inevitable the sanction will follow this kind of behavior.
Let's talk about the Abraham Accords, and I want to turn to you on this, Rami. These were the agreements that were signed with Israel and a number of Arab countries, including the United Arab Emirates. This was the cornerstone of President Trump's first administration, is further recognition of Israel by Arab countries. Are we likely to see these same countries now pull out of the Abraham Accords the further Israel goes in its current policy? Because they have said that annexation, or at least the UAE has said that annexation is a red line for them.
I don't think they're going to pull out, but they may make some gestures. They may pull back their ambassadors or their representatives, but these are not. Sorry, these are not fully sovereign countries. The Arab countries have difficulty making really important strategic decisions, like relations with Israel, like trade relations, like arms purchases, without the approval of some kind of foreign patron, whether it's the US, Russia, Iran, Turkey, whoever it may be. And in some cases, it's Israel. Israel has to approve any major arms purchases from the US, for instance, that go to Arab countries. So I don't think they're going to do anything dramatic, because the Abraham Accords are not a serious sign of movement towards the political future. They're a sign of the continued desire of colonial Western powers with the Zionist movement to evade the reality of the Palestinians and their rights by trying to say we have good relations with all the Arab states. And they're also an attempt to show that man indeed and woman can't live by bread alone, that if you can do economic gain and you sell surveillance technology and stuff like that, that's enough to have a good life without looking at the moral issues and the identity issues and the national rights issues. So the Abraham Accords are not a serious long-term context that we should think about, but they do indicate that there's always movement that's possible between the Israelis and the Arabs have all given Israel the sign through the Arab peace plan. We're ready to live with a Zionist Jewish state in 67 borders that can be adjusted. So there's no need to go around the Palestine issue to get peace with the Arab countries and the Islamic countries.
And in terms of further outside pressure, this was suggested earlier, this idea of that Spain suggested barring Israel from a number of sporting cultural events. You think that would make a difference, Michael Link?
I understand that UEFA in Europe is considering petitions tomorrow's at meetings as whether or not to include Israel or to exclude it from future football matches with European national teams. If that's at least being discussed on a serious level at UEFA, that tells me that there's momentum for building up a sports boycott is probably gathering steam. It may or may not be successful tomorrow, but I don't think this is going to be stopped if there's a negative vote on Tuesday regarding this. This will wind up continuing, particularly when we consider that the head of the IDF said late last week that the operation that the IDF is going to conduct in Gaza City and the areas around Gaza City will take months to try to uproot Hamas. So Israel has a promise of at least 3 to 6 more months, likely, where it's going to be in the bullseye of the international community for the devastation that it's ravaging on Gaza. And I think you're going to see greater boycott moves and sanction moves with respect to those Western countries that have deep economic and investment and technology ties with Israeli companies. This is far from being over, I think. And Israel is recognizing, I think, that its greatest vulnerability has to do with its economic and diplomatic relationships with the global north, particularly with Europe.
All right, well, we'll have to see how all of this plays out throughout the week at the UN. We'll have to leave it there. Rami Khouri, Yossi Meckelberg, and Michael Link, thanks very much for being part of this discussion. And thanks for watching. You can follow us on social media and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Hazem Sika. We'll see you next time.